You presented Grant and I with this awesome formula before we start off, which you're calling your minimum viable life. And it was just so enthralling that I think we really want to bring into this episode. Can you explain what it is and then how it applies to generally the conversation we're having now?
100%. So we've talked about setting the right goals, right? Which is really, really important. Like, what's the strategy? Because you can't have a strategy without knowing where you're trying to get to. That just doesn't, those two things don't work. You have to actually understand what are you trying to achieve and why. If you're starting a software business, is it because you want to build $1 billion company? And you know, what is the thing? And then
talking to the Goose.
Yeah,
good. Keep talking
what activities and what pathway would lead to creating $1 billion company versus a $1 million company, right? And so the understanding where the endpoint is critical. Now, the endpoint can be whatever you want, right? And then how you get there is really interesting, because I know people, don't know them personally, but I look at people who have made hundreds of millions of dollars in real estate in a pretty short period of time. But the thing is, they've had to have a specific strategy to get there. They've used a lot of other people's money. They've potentially done some developments, all these kind of things, a different risk profile. For most people, the idea of investing in property is, and particularly for business owners, is to create wealth outside of business, right? It's to be able to say, all right, I have got not only a wealth base, which I can feel comfortable that I'm going to be safe and secure, but also an income strategy such that if something happened to the business, or if I got rid of the business, I would not have to rely on trading my time for money in order to get by, right? So you want to, typically there's another income stream associated with that. So understanding what that looks like is really interesting, because the most common goal that people have is 10 properties in 10 years and $100,000 cash flow. That is like, I don't know exactly where that came from, but I've heard that specific and exact goal from more people than I can even think about. Like, it's crazy, right? So somewhere in our common psyche, we've established this, like 10 properties in 10 years and 100K income. And it's like, well, cool. So what's the actual goal then? Is it 100K, or actually is it to get all your time back, right? Because a lot of people are in a position where they just want to be able to wake up and do what they're passionate about, do what they want, when they want, with who they want. And if that is potentially potentially could be the impetus for somebody to start a business and to know that their needs are taken care of, because they don't feel like they have to race around and try and do whatever they need to do to make a start and get cash, right? So there's all these different reasons for it. Now, understanding what that looks like is really, really interesting, because it might not be $100,000. It could be more than $100,000 that you need, right? It might be $200,000 that you need. And if you've set a goal of $100,000, then your strategy won't lead you to the right destination. However, maybe you don't need $100,000. Maybe you only need $50,000 or $60,000. In which case, maybe you can achieve the life that you want, freedom, choice, and abundance to do what you want, when you want, with who you want, in a much shorter time frame. Maybe it's not 10 years. Maybe it's 5. And so understanding that and understanding how you use the strategy to get to that point is really, really, really critical. So we actually created a formula to be able to work this out, which I think is super helpful if people can kind of set this on board, right? And the formula is basically this. It's your current living expenses, okay? And most people are like, how do I work that out? It's like, cool, just get your bank statements for the last 3 months, right? Add them all up, divide it by 3. That'll kind of give you an average living expenses for the last 3 months, minus any specific work-related expenses. So, for example, some people have 2 cars because they've got to go to different offices, or one person's got to be able to travel for work, or the other one takes the kids to school or whatever. So maybe if you didn't have to work anymore, if you didn't have that as part of your life, maybe you wouldn't need 2 cars, right? So is that a direct work-related expense? Because the goal here is like, how do we get to a point where we could wake up one day in our current state of living, in our current circumstance, and just not have to go to work, like not have to show up at all, and we'd have everything covered. So your current living expenses minus any direct work or business related expenses that you could take off the table if you didn't have to do that, or you weren't engaged in that anymore. So you kind of like, so let's say that you've got $60,000 in annual living expenses. So take your 3 months, divide them by 12, times it by 12. Let's say you've got $60,000 in annual living expenses. And let's say of that $60,000, $10,000 of it is direct work-related expenses, right? And so that could be the second car, it could be buying suits, it could be public transport, it could be any of these kind of things. We'll say that would mean that your actual cost of living minus your work-related expenses is about $50,000. Now we've got that number, $50,000. So current living expenses minus work-related expenses times by inflation to the power of how many years you want to take to get to your goal, which sounds a little complex. So if we assume that the inflation rate is 3% on average, but use whatever number you're satisfied with, because I don't really mind, because it's about you choosing your own, whatever number is the most suitable for you, right? So let's say that we average a 3% inflation rate, and let's say that I want to achieve my freedom number in 10 years. So if I had $60,000 minus $10,000 of work-related expenses, that's $50,000, times by 1.03, 3%, to the power of 10 years. That would mean that I would need to create a strategy that would allow me to get to $67,195 of free cash flow over the next 10 years. And that would specifically and deliberately inform how much resources I need to put towards it, what types of properties or what types of assets would I need to invest in to get to that destination. And I think that this is really, really liberating. So I'll let you guys jump in there because I know you could probably want to talk about this, but I'm just going to recap. I'm going to recap on the formula to make it really, really simple. Okay. Current living expenses minus work-related expenses times by inflation to the power of years to go equals freedom number. That's simple.
I think you clearly explained that. I didn't actually have a jump in at all. Grant, did you nail that? I'm like, the only thing that came to mind is Goose is clearly doing this for someone that doesn't have kids. Like anyone who's running a household with kids under 50, well done. Well done. But of course, adjust your own numbers.
Well, it's funny. But it's funny that you say that, Charlie, because let's say that you do have kids. I've actually written down an example of if you do have kids, right? Because you might have kids now, right? And let's say that you expect them to leave home in 15 years from now. I don't know. Let's say maybe they're 10 years old. I don't know, right? But let's say you expect
to put them to work young. They should cover themselves from a young age. No, of course not.
Okay, so let's say you've got kids, right? And your current household expenses minus your work-related expenses, or whatever, are 150K, right? But let's say you expect the kids to move out of home within the next 15 years, and you've got a goal that in 15 years, that's when like you're kind of happy, you're on track, you're all good, you're not desperate to kind of sail around the world or whatever. But let's say your goal is in 15 years, then you would take your current living expenses, which might be say 150 grand, minus like specifically child-related expenses, could be school fees, could be whatever, minus any work costs. Let's say, for the point of this discussion, that's 50 grand, right? So then you've gone, okay, it's my total expenses minus 50 grand a year is going to give me 100 times by inflation to the power of 15. And so then you would be actually, because if you're planning to have your freedom number at a point where you're not going to have those expenses, i.e. your kids, then you should plan for that too. And so you can start to think about how that maps, right? I know you've got kids, so maybe you're thinking, okay, well, in 20 years, what is that going to look like and what number would we need then? And it's going to be very different from what your living expenses are today. So you can actually factor that in as you're thinking about it.
Hey, fellow business owner, if this topic and value-packed short video has resonated with you at all, and you want to dive deeper into creating wealth inside and outside your business, check out the full episode by clicking the link on your screen or in the description right now.